Thank you, Secretary Kerry, for coming today. You mentioned in your remarks that we don't need politicians to go home and say we need to end foreign aid and we need to spend some of that money at home. Well, this might come as news to one of the most prominent politicians in our country who said in his reelection campaign that we need to do less nation building abroad and more nation building at home, and that would be your current boss, the President of the United States. So I don't think this is unique to Republicans or Democrats. In fact, it crosses all party lines. It's not me going home and creating an atmosphere where people are doubtful of foreign aid. It's that 80 to 90% of people are doubtful. We have 2 bridges in my state that are over 50 years old. The president came and I flew down with him to talk about rebuilding them. I'm in favor of replacing bridges and rebuilding our infrastructure. But at the same time, we seem to not have enough money to keep the doors open around here, not enough money to keep the touring of the White House open. This administration sent an extra $250 million to Egypt. Many of us find that offensive. We can't even run the basic functions of government, and yet we send an extra $250 million in addition to the $2 billion we already send over there. So many of us are offended by this. The question I have for you is, the Mubarak family is said to be worth more than $10 billion. Most people say that a lot of that money came from our foreign aid. Mobutu ruled for many, many years in Central Africa. He was said to be worth millions upon millions, if not billions of dollars. His wife was called Gucci Mobutu. She was famous for going to Paris and shopping for shoes with a Louis Vuitton bag full of $500,000 in cash to $1 million in cash. That money was looted from the American Treasury. There is all kinds of examples of theft and kleptocracy. There's examples of our foreign aid being used to buy tear gas in Egypt, used to spray on the Egyptian people. So I don't think it even buys the goodwill of the people, because often it's stolen by their leaders who are unpopular in their country. So I think it's often counterproductive. But I think we're missing the boat here if you think that we're stoking the fires and that the people don't already believe this. This is something that is already in the psyche of the people. People are upset about it, would rather spend money at home. But I'd like your comments on the president's position, but also on the idea of that a lot of foreign aid has been stolen by these leaders.
Well, Senator, I think there's a difference between, some of the nation building that we've seen sometimes engaged in and good foreign aid programs that don't rise to the level necessarily of sort of nation building. But that's a quibbling probably, and we'll wind up arguing about the smaller issue rather than the larger one here. So let me try to frame it this way. Has some money been stolen? Absolutely. But by the largest measure possible today, because of reforms that have been put in place, because of new accountability systems, because of the way aid is given now, because of something like the Millennium Challenge Corporation standards that are applied to investment and other kinds of things, the money, a lot of it doesn't go to governments anymore directly. It goes into either the investment or into the project, and it's quite controlled. And that's one of the reforms that has been put into place. And we often have a fight about that with some countries. For instance, Pakistan pushed very, very hard to say, no, we want it directly to the government. We said, no, we're going to do it this way to project and so forth in order to have the kind of accountability that you're talking about, that we need. So historically, yeah, but some of the riches of people who have ripped off their own governments have not necessarily come from our aid. They've come from stealing from the revenues of their oil or selling the diamonds and the rubies that they have in their resource-rich, mines. And there are plenty of ways that people have enriched themselves in some countries to the adversity of their people. That's something we fight. I mean, that is also part of what our foreign policy and investments try to change, is installing rule of law, is trying to help with a justice system, create accountability for those things.
But nevertheless, we kept sending money to Mobutu for years and Mubarak for years, despite evidence that they were stealing it.
I didn't make that decision, and I'll certainly review any program that we're engaged in now, and if you have any information about something we're doing now that somebody's stealing, let me know immediately. But let me just come back to one thing about this. You know, all of this that we do, Senator Paul, is 1 penny on the dollar. And if you look, I mean, I can go through a long list of things that we invest in that provide a return on our investment. I'll give you an example. We have stopped countless plots against our country, which had the FBI not cooperated and had the CIA and other entities not been creating some of the programs we had, and had we not worked with the justice systems and had Interpol and the other things that we work with, we never would have done. Americans would have died, and they would have been blown up. And but for the discovery of the Christmas bomber or the other people, which came through these kinds of efforts, we made our country safer. So I have to tell you, for the penny on the dollar, I'll still make this argument anywhere, even though, yes, occasionally something gets abused, just as it gets abused in some parts of almost every government.
One quick question. Yesterday, the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, stated that he was no longer sure that the United States could clearly identify the right people in Syria. I'm quite concerned with this and quite concerned about arming elements of radical jihad that ultimately will come back to be our enemies or enemies of Israel. My question is that there's a million Christians in Syria. I don't think they've quite decided which side they're on. 250,000 of those Christians came from Iraq because they weren't too happy with the government that's been installed in Iraq after we win the war. So the question is, you win the war and radical Islam takes over in Syria, or you give weapons to these groups. You have your own Joint Chiefs of Staff saying he's not sure he knows who the right guys are and who to arm. I really think we ought to be careful about getting involved in this civil war.
Well, Senator, your warning is a legitimate one, and we are being careful, which is why the President has not yet decided whether or not, which is why the President has not given lethal aid. He has given non-lethal aid. But the President is correct, I believe, in his determination that President Assad can no longer represent the people of that country, and that the Syrian opposition is the broad-based international entity that is representative of the real aspirations of the Syrian people. Now, that's a different determination from actually deciding you can protect who's getting what. I've had conversations with General Dempsey, obviously, and I read his quote, and I saw what he said. I think he really said, we're not certain we can do that yet, but we have to make certain, or we have to be sure. And that's exactly what we do have to do, and that's exactly what we're engaged in. That's why I have this meeting that I'm going to in Istanbul on the weekend. And a lot of discussion is taking place to be certain of that determination. I think what he's really saying is be sure before you make the decision, and he's right, and that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you.